Hello, viewers. A very warm welcome to all of you. And today it's an honor and a privilege to be hosting somebody very distinguished from Israel. He is Professor Inbar, Professor Efraim Inbar. He is the president of Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. He's been a founding director of Begin Sadat Center for Strategic Studies, and that was a position he held for 23 years. And is a professor of political studies at Bar Ilan University. He has been a visiting professor at Georgetown, Johns Hopkins, and Boston universities. He's a visiting scholar at Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. He's a Manfred Warner NATO Fellow. I can keep on rattling these names, but what is very interesting and which is something very close to my heart is that he's been a member of the Political Strategic Committee of the National Planning Council and chairman of the National Security Curriculum Committee in the Ministry of Education of Israel, and a member of the Academic Committee of the IDF History Department. And he has written 5 books: Outcast Countries in the World Community, War and Peace in Israeli Politics, Labour Party Positions on National Security, Rabin and Israel's National Security, the Israeli-Turkish Entity, and Israel's National Security Issues and Challenges since the Yom Kippur War 2008. So I can still go on, but I think that is sufficient to give us a glimpse of the kind of life he's had, and we are honored to have him with us. Shalom, Professor Efraim Inbar.
Shalom, namaste to everybody.
The time at which we are having this interview is very hard for the country you are living in, because you are in the midst of not a full-scale war, but still a very disturbing situation. And I, on behalf of all like-minded people of India, pray to God Almighty that you come out unscathed out of all this and emerge victorious as always. And our good wishes are with the people of Israel.
Thank you very much.
Today, since we are going to discuss about international situation, and fortunately you are an expert at that. First of all, what I would like to ask from you on behalf of all the audience back home in India is that when we are looking at this situation in Israel, in the Middle East, now something that comes to our mind is that recently there is a word which has gained a lot of currency, that is toolkit. Now, what we see is that we have a very disturbing situation in Kashmir. So if we compare, although right now the situation in Israel has been exacerbated by the attacks from Gaza Strip and Hamas, my question would be what India has to learn from Israel vis-a-vis Gaza and Kashmir. Are there any common patterns that you look into these two situations?
There are definitely certain similarities. India, as well as Israel, is facing on its border. You are within, Kashmir is within your border. Gaza was within our border, but we evacuated Gaza several years ago, and we are no longer there. But the population in Gaza, and probably part of the population in Kashmir, is very radical. Part of it has Muslim background. They are radicalized Islamists, and they are intent to fight the state. The Gaza people, particularly the Hamas organization, does not recognize the existence of Israel, is not willing to accept a Jewish state next to it, and is carrying the Palestinian flame of resistance, as they call it, against the Israeli state. In Kashmir, you have also a group of terrorists, just like Hamas, that are fighting the Indian state. I want to point out that this is not a symmetric war. Obviously, India, as well as Israel, are militarily much stronger than the Hamas terrorist organization or the Kashmiri Islamic militants. Nevertheless, this is a perennial problem for both states because it's not easy to solve this type of situation. Actually, I'm not sure that this type of situation is soluble at all. And we are both facing protracted, limited war against the state. And in such cases, you can actually destroy some of the capabilities of your opponent, but it's very difficult to destroy their will to fight you. And of course, the more radical you are, the more zealous religiously you are, you have greater motivation to fight the enemy. And of course, you can kill many, but there are still always some group remaining there that is ready to fight and sacrifice their lives for the cause they believe in. Therefore, the strategy, one strategy is, of course, liberal thinking that you try to educate them, you try to bring them, a better standard of living, and then eventually they'll see the light and stop fighting. Well, this is not working. We know that there is no relation whatsoever between standard of living and terrorism. Bin Laden was a millionaire. He lived very well. He didn't have any problems, and still he was a terrorist. So believing that you can fully pacify a hostile population that is religiously, radicalized is simply not working. And therefore, Israel reluctantly adopted a strategy of what I call mowing the grass. We realize that we cannot achieve the political goal of peace. We cannot achieve the political goal of convincing our opponent, enough, we don't fight anymore, let's live in peace, and we'll be good neighbors, and you'll prosper. This doesn't work, and it's not achievable. Therefore, in the meantime, you try to limit damage to yourself, and you limit the capabilities of your opponent to harm you. And this is what is actually happening in Gaza now. The Israeli goal is not to convince Hamas to give up its struggle. The Israeli goal is not to take over Gaza and get rid of this group, because even if we kill many, which will buy us some time, eventually the people in Gaza will bring out a new generation of radicals. And we have to understand that the Palestinians, particularly in Gaza, like Hamas was elected by democratic elections. So you cannot achieve your political goal. What you can go once in a while, after suffering a little bit and gaining some international legitimacy, which is important for operating militarily, to go in by ground forces, which is not always recommended, but from the air, particularly if you have a good air force, and Israel has a good air force. The Indian Air Force is also a good one. By the same, they have the same letters, IAF. It's the Indian Air Force as well as the Israeli Air Force. and try to destroy the capabilities of the terrorists. And this is what we are doing now in Gaza. We basically destroy their infrastructure, their command infrastructure, their command and communication system. We are destroying their capabilities, research and development capabilities for missiles and other type of weapons they are developing. And we also destroy as much as possible their launching capabilities. At the same time, we also are engaged in destroying what we call a metro. Basically, there is an underground infrastructure, many tunnels that are used for offensive or defensive purposes, and this is what the Air Force now, Israeli Air Force is doing presently. So you have to understand that in this type of encounter, your political goals are modest, limited, no chance of a clear victory unless you kill everybody, and this is not always possible. And in the meantime, you are inflicting pain on the opponent, hoping that, of course, limiting its capabilities, but also hoping that it will restore temporary deterrence. We have no illusions that any military operation will bring quiet for a long period because, as I mentioned, the motivation is there. And you cannot eradicate their motivation. And I think in Kashmir, you have a similar problem. You cannot eradicate the motivation to fight against the Indian government by those extreme militants, particularly since they are aided by a neighboring country, which is giving them military capabilities, and of course also indoctrination and what is needed to keep up the motivation. So it's a religious conflict, which is not easy to solve. And we have to be realistic in what can be done, and we need a lot of patience. Victory is not around the corner, and it is a protracted struggle, which is very difficult for democracy. A democracy like Israel, a democracy like India, can win a war, a conventional war, can gather legitimacy for winning a conventional war, for having a long, protracted conflict is more difficult. Many people get tired of it, are impatient, don't understand the situation, they have illusions about the enemy, and we have to approach, in my view, this type of situations with much patience and understand that the goals that can be attained are modest.
Okay. Now, what we see is that, as you very rightly pointed out, that this is a religiously motivated war, and we don't see any light at the end of the tunnel because it is going to be perpetual as long as they are programmed to become mujahids or jihadis.
Right.
So that is the source of their inspiration. But apart from that, what gives them intellectual cover is there are some people, for example, in India, we have our social media, our mainstream media, which is heavily, I would say, infested by left leaning individuals who deliberately give them intellectual cover and try to provide them legitimacy, whether they are the fighters in Kashmir, so-called fighters in Kashmir, and likewise the ongoing the conflict in Palestine and Israel. There again, the portrayal is sometimes deliberately designed to create an impression that it is the Israelis who are the aggressors, and the other party is somehow a very benign population which is under attack by a very brutal opponent. And so, is this situation in Israel's mainstream media and social media also the same?
I think that Israel, as well as India, suffer from a bad press. The general media is biased, and of course, the social media is reflects this type of biases. Unfortunately, many journalists are afflicted with moral relativity. In basically such wars, there are the good guys and the bad guys. And many journalists and many people in the public at large are unable, partly because they are fed by the media, to distinguish between those that are the aggressors and those that employ force in order to defend themselves. And it is quite clear, who wants to change the status quo. It is radical Islamists in Kashmir that want to fight a democracy. India, it's a democracy, and use of force within a political entity is something that is very wrong. If they have any complaints, there is a democratic process that should be pursued. In Israel, of course, we have a similar situation. Of course, they are not part of our democracy, and they are trying to kill indiscriminately civilians, which is a war crime in itself. They are also committing another crime against humanity by hiding among civilians and using the poor Gazans as a human shield. The international media does not distinguish between those things. They count bodies. And if in India the terrorists are killing civilians, they count how many civilians were killed, how many soldiers were killed, how many militants, and this is not the right accounting. The more bad guys are killed, the better humanity is. I'll put it quite bluntly.
Yeah.
They are unable to make this type of judgment. Also, it's quite clear that they sympathize with what is considered the weak side. Who is the weak side? Of course, a few terrorists they are the weak side. India is a strong country. So they sympathize with the weak.
Yeah.
But the weak are bad, are evil. They can't see it. Hamas the same. Of course, Israel, thank God, is a strong country. But they sympathize with a few. And they ask me and others, how many Israelis were killed? Thank God we have an Iron Dome system that defends our cities. We don't use civilians as a human shield. And in this conflict, we were successful in minimizing our civilian casualties. And we pay a price for it. We don't have enough dead and wounded to justify the sympathy of the world. They have more. This is immoral to count and to relate to a war in such a way. So unfortunately, the same type of bias that is directed toward Israel is also directed toward India.
Yeah.
India is strong. It's numerous. Yeah. Obviously, over 1 billion people are more than a few terrorists. So who is the strong side? Yeah. So it's so they blame India. All this issue of disproportionate force. a guy that tries to kill me by a knife, am I supposed to defend myself only with a knife? And if I use a revolver or if I use a machine gun, it's disproportionate use of force?
Absolutely right.
It's ridiculous.
Hmm.
And all those biases are afflicting the international media. And there is something, in those universities that produce journalists or whatever, education they undergo, this is the wrong education. They lose their moral compass.
Exactly.
And, I'm very sorry that
Yeah.
India and us share the same problem.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's going to change anytime soon. And we have to fight it. Our duty is to tell the truth in the best way we can and to try to, to influence, to make our case in, in the front of decent people. Some decent people eventually will listen to us.
Yeah. Now, something that I find very hypocritical here in Indian mass media is that they claim themselves to be highly educated guys who are guys or girls, whatever is the case, who have read very large number of books and have conducted numerous researches in various fields. But the hypocrisy becomes apparent when they don't discuss one book which is the source of their inspiration, which is producing generation after generation of terrorists who are willing to die for an imaginary Jannah or heaven, and that is the source of this entire mayhem all around the world. And in a sense, I feel that these individuals or intellectuals who give them this intellectual fire cover are also guilty of murder. Don't you think so?
Listen, a good education doesn't mean that you are a moral person.
Yeah,
Doesn't
absolutely.
if you go to a university, it does not produce moral people. They produce people that know more. That's true. But are students at universities taught to distinguish between right and evil? I've been at university for many years.
Hmm.
In my courses, when I try to make this distinction, some of the students complain that I'm political.
Oh,
Distinguishing,
see, since we got disconnected when we were talking about that these journalists, they are also complacent as far as their faulty reporting is concerned, and you were very rightly pointing out that education does not guarantee a person with the right morality. Kindly go on, Professor Ephraim.
and the schools that are growing this type of journalists are full of professors with leftist ideas. This is the case in most academic worlds in the world, including in Israel. And I'm sorry that they don't get the right lenses to look at situations of conflict. And they need a better education than they get.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. One more question that I would like to ask from you is that now US is planning to come out of Afghanistan. They're trying to withdraw the US forces which were stationed there for a pretty long time. And since you are a specialist in the domain of international strategies and international relations, what do you think are going to be the global repercussions of the US forces withdrawing from Afghanistan? Specifically as far as the interests of Israel and India are concerned.
Well, first of all, we should understand the Americans got tired of being in Afghanistan, seeing that their military presence doesn't yield any positive results. This shouldn't surprise us. The British were there and couldn't stay for long. The Russians were there and fought, and they fought ruthlessly, and still they got out. And the Americans probably made a mistake, not in trying to intervene and to punish Taliban, but in staying. I think that in this type of situations, a punitive expedition, a Roman type of punitive expedition, is the best measure, and not to try to make them of Roman culture. So the Americans are out, and I wouldn't blame them. This is true also of Iraq. There are places you really can't fix, and you have to leave them to their destiny. Again, trying to minimize the damage that comes from them. So the Americans will be out. I think that we'll see a continuation of the civil war in Afghanistan. Taliban probably has a good chance of winning that war, as it did in the past. And they will take over Afghanistan, and Afghanistan will go back to the Middle Ages. Because we all know what the Taliban stands for. As long as there is a civil war, of course, there will be less damage to the outside because they are busy fighting each other. As soon, and that is not bad. Let's say it openly. If they fight each other, they have energies to deal with others. But eventually, every war must end. So Taliban will gain probably the upper hand. And this is bad news for the neighborhood, first of all. And because they have pretensions, to help others and to export their ideology. And their immediate neighbors will have to face the situation. Nowadays, Iran, who is a neighbor, is helping them because they want to get rid of the Americans from them. But eventually, they'll have to face the Taliban, and I'm not sure what's better for Iran, but that's a different issue. Pakistan has been infiltrated, from what I know, by Islamist elements that are, similar and have good relations with Taliban. And of course, we may see an effort on part of those Islamist elements to take over Pakistan. Also in Central Asia, we may see repercussions of Taliban activism. So this is, first of all, their immediate region. If they'll go to international terrorism, we may see, those targets that are Western, primarily Western, and probably also India. So, they don't have much love for India, will be targeted, primarily the soft targets. An end to the war will not bring, the end to the American presence, of course, will not bring more stability or security to the region. But the Americans don't care. The Americans are far away with two big moats, two big oceans on both sides, and they think they are safe. We know that this is not exactly true, but until there will be another 9/11, they will stay put at home, taking care of their domestic problems. And of course, they have another major challenge, and this is, of course, China. So one result of the American withdrawal from Afghanistan will be a greater ability to concentrate on the real challenger to their global position, which is China. And this is a positive result of their withdrawal. they'll be able to focus on the real challenge. After all, Taliban was not such a big threat to American global dominance. And the people left in the region, they will have to take care of the repercussions. It's not an easy situation to deal with this type of regime and, very radical, very extremist. It's similar to what we have in Gaza. So I wish you good luck.
Thank you. Here we have two apprehensions. One is regarding Afghanistan, that maybe it will go down the Sudan way, that there will be a perpetual civil war. And second, immediately concerns us that these radicalized elements will be used by Pakistan to send over to India to reinforce their jihad of Kashmir. So, keeping these two things in mind, what do you think? 5 years down the road, what kind of situation or scenario can we expect?
Well, first of all, I'm not an expert on Pakistan, so I'm not really an authoritative voice on Pakistani options. But for the sake of cautiousness, you should be prepared to deal with all scenarios possible. You have to basically prepare for a worst case scenario. You can hope for an optimistic outcome, but you have to do everything possible in order to prevent the materialization of bad scenarios. And I think that India, military forces are able to deal with all situations. There may be a price for it, yeah, of course, but that's the price is connected to your aspiration to be a sovereign state.
And this price has to be paid by every civilized society which is facing aggression from uncivilized people, I guess.
Yes, the barbarians are out there. We should always remember. And we are, both countries, civilized countries. And I will, tell you, there is a famous quip of one of our prime minister that we are a jungle, a villa in a jungle. And we should remember that.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. When we, considering that there has been recently a regime change in America, do you foresee any change in their global strategy due to that change of regime?
The Biden administration is, of course, very similar to the Obama administration, although it may have learned something. The Obama administration was very idealistic, and we see that Biden, who has been older than Obama and had greater experience, particularly in international relations, may choose a somewhat different path. Although we have to remember that part of his party, the Democratic Party in the United States, the progressive camp, what's called the progressive, it's retrogressive, but they call it progressive, and it's like the journalist we were talking before.
Yeah.
So, for example, in Gaza, President Biden gave us enough leeway. So far, he has supported Israel and didn't impose on Israel a ceasefire. However, having said that, I think that the Biden administration is on a catastrophic course on the issue of Iran. They don't get, the consequences of reaching a new JCPOA, a new nuclear deal with Iran, which will immediately cause nuclear proliferation, because everybody understands in the region that the JCPOA, the nuclear deal of 2015, is allowing Iran to get a nuclear bomb, and many other countries will follow suit because they don't want to face a nuclear Iran. I'm talking about, of course, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and a multipolar nuclear Middle East will be a disaster.
It will be a nightmare.
Excuse me?
It will be a nightmare.
Right. It is a nightmare. It will be a nightmare, obviously, because it's very difficult, to try to deter so many lunatics around us. So it's not an easy job. Some of them are radical Islamists. We are talking about Islamist regime in Tehran. We are talking about an Islamist leader in Ankara, in Turkey, and the Saudis that are considered moderate. After all, we shouldn't forget that the Wahhabi religion, which is rather extreme, is basically the ruling religion in Saudi Arabia, and they have to be careful, if they will not be close to the button, if they'll have a bomb. So this is of trouble. On China, I think that the Biden are on the right track. They understand that they have a problem with China. The China is challenging them. What will they do? It's a different question. It's also too early. After all, only in January they came into power, and they don't have yet even nominated all the people, didn't fill in all the positions in the defense ministry, in the foreign ministry. So it's still a foreign policy that is in the working. Hopefully, Biden will not parrot Obama. Obama was seen as a weakling, and this is bad news for America and for the free world.
Yeah. Interesting that you bring in China over here, because I find it somewhat intriguing that on one hand, when US pulls out, Taliban will be spilling out, and especially they'll be going towards Pakistan, no doubt about that. And China has strategic and financial investment into Pakistan. So this will be a very strange mix that on one hand, China is acting as a big brother, putting in a lot of money, pumping in a lot of money in Pakistan. And then we have this destabilizing force coming from the other side in the form of Taliban. How do you look at that?
I'm of course aware of the China involvement in Pakistan, but now if Pakistan becomes a clear Islamist power, radical Islamist power, it's a tiger that I'm not sure the Chinese will easily ride on it. After all, radical Islam is anti-communist. So there may be some tensions there. And from what I understand, the Chinese are careful. I'm not sure they will help in radicalizing Pakistan, because it might be against their statist interests. But again, this is a speculation. I don't know what will happen.
Okay. What do you think of the role that word press is going to play? Like nowadays, we see that the major news outlets or media outlets like CNN and BBC, they have these very strong left leanings, and as a result, what they do is they are always trying to defend radical Islam instead of, as we earlier also talked. Now, the result of this is that they give bad press, like to Israel, again to India also. So, in a sense, what they are doing is they are destabilizing the entire world. So, do you think it is going to continue that way, or do you see any ray of hope at the end of the tunnel?
The Obama presidency had good relations with the Muslim Brothers. They thought that the Muslim Brotherhood is the future wave. Of course, this temptation, to deal with the Muslim Brothers and forget that they're anti-Western, anti-democratic, and desiring to establish, a caliphate, a Muslim empire over the whole world, is is there. This is part of the blindness, the strategic blindness and the moral blindness of part of the Western world. And possibility for appeasement is always there. Europe has now maybe 10% of its population Muslim immigrants, and we see how they behave. And it's not good news. Maybe there will be an awakening, hopefully, but I'm not sure about that. So this possibility of courting, radical Islam does exist, and it is our duty to tell, the people, beware, it's dangerous.
Okay. One last question. We started by comparing the situation in Kashmir with what is going on in your backyard. Now, what we have seen is that even young kids, 7, 8, 9 years of age, have been thoroughly
आपका
radicalized.
क्या नाम है? मोहम्मद उमर। आप बड़े होके क्या बनोगे? तो क्या करोगे? शहीद होऊंगा। किधर गोली खाओगे उमर? इधर। किसके लिए लड़ोगे? कश्मीर से। अब आप पूछो चाचा जी से जो। उमर कैसे करोगे? आप बम ब्लास्ट कैसे होगा? बताओ ना कैसे क्या बांधोगे कैसे करोगे? इधर बम बांधूंगा सीने के साथ। नहीं बम बांध के कश्मीर आजाद नहीं करवाना हमने, ठीक है ना? हमने उनसे ना कहते हैं दिमाग की जंग लड़नी है। बम बांध के जितने लोग गए हैं ना कश्मीर आजाद नहीं हुआ। इसका अपना स्टाइल है ना? हाँ बिल्कुल। लेकिन आपने पता क्या करना है? आपने पढ़ना है, आपने कुरान पाक हिफ्ज़ कर रहे हो, कुरान पाक हिफ्ज़ करना है और बच्चों को पढ़ाना है। और हम लोग का जो रेफरेंडम पता है क्या? वोट के थ्रू जो वोट नहीं डालते, वोट डालते हैं कि हम किसके साथ हमने रहना है, हमने इंडिया के साथ रहना है या पाकिस्तान के साथ रहना है। रेफरेंडम के हम कश्मीर को लेंगे, जंग नहीं करनी, शहीद होंगे। ये बात का रटन गाता है, ये बात शहीद इसके दिल में बहुत जज्बा है शहीद होने का। अभी लेकिन वो जो शहीद हुए तुम्हारे क्या लगता है? इनका एक साथी मुझे शहीद हो गया ना पिछले दिनों में। अच्छा। माशाल्लाह इतना तुरंत लग रहा था वाकई शहीद हुआ है। नहीं वहाँ पे तो फिर जाहिर सी बात है जो भी है। तो आप कुरान पाक पढ़ो, कुरान पाक हिफ्ज़ करो, अपनी सारी स्टडीज एजुकेशन मुकम्मल करो, उसके बाद फिर हम कश्मीर के लिए, मैं आपके साथ हूँ, हम कश्मीर के लिए लड़ेंगे, ठीक है? प्रॉमिस मेरा, मैं आपके साथ हूँ। वोटों पे नहीं लड़ता कह रहा है, जैसे वोटों पे तो नहीं, कश्मीर का रेफरेंडम की आज़ादी के लिए हम इंडिया और पाकिस्तान से बात करेंगे ना कि हमने किसके साथ रहना है। हम कहेंगे हमने अलग रहना है, मुख्तार कश्मीर। क्यों? ना हम इंडिया के साथ रहेंगे ना पाकिस्तान के साथ रहेंगे, ऐसा ही है ना? मैंने बस शहीद होने
And they've been trained to throw stones at our security forces. And sometimes it looks like that they have started picking up the younger generation even at a very vulnerable age. Are you seeing the same happening in Palestine also?
Yes, definitely. Basically, they are exploiting the weaknesses of a democracy. We don't want to kill children. They are not of legal age to be taken to court. So they use kids in order to do damage to Israelis. They throw stones at our soldiers. And we are helpless. We simply have to swallow it because we want to look in the mirror the next day. We don't want to do things that we'll be ashamed of, simply. So we have moral constraints that they don't have. This is exactly the problem. They have no moral constraints in using children, women as a human shield. This is exactly what's happening in Gaza, and you are facing probably the same in Kashmir.
Yeah. Okay. That is my set of questions which I wanted to ask from you. Anything you would like to add?
I wish you good luck. I'm a friend of India, and I hope you'll overcome soon your COVID-19 problem, and you will go back to prosper.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that. And the feeling is mutual. We also wish you all the success. You come out with flying colors from this conflict that is tearing apart the country.
Thank you.
Thank you. Shalom. Namaste.
Shalom. Namaste.